What if I told you that at the root of the fight for environmental justice was a struggle against racism? The real story lies in struggle, sacrifice, and the courage of Black communities that dared to resist a system. In December 1978, North Carolina's then Governor James Hunt Jr. announced plans to dump 60,000 tons of PCB, poisoned with cancer-causing chemicals, into a rural community in Warren County. Life went on, but certainly not for the people of Warren County. The residents knew what this meant. Their land, their water, and their lives were about to be contaminated, and so they stood up. In September 1982, as trucks carrying toxic soil rumbled towards the site, men and women of Warren County lay down in the roads blocking their paths. More than 300 protesters were arrested. But before we continue this journey, let's talk a bit about PCBs and why this was such a bad thing. PCBs are polychlorinated biphenyls, an industrial chemical that was widely used in the past for electrical insulating and resistant properties. These chemicals are carcinogenic, meaning they're linked to cancer. Now imagine such chemicals carelessly spilled near your home for you to inhale every single day. Now let's get back to the story. Unfortunately, their efforts did not stop the landfill, but it did something greater. It lit a fire. For the first time, the world began to see environmental harm not as an accident of geography, but as an injustice rooted in race and poverty. Warren County became the birthplace of a movement. Around the same time in Houston, Texas, a young sociologist named Robert Bullard joined his wife in a lawsuit to stop a landfill from being placed in a Black neighborhood. Unfortunately, the judge ultimately ruled in the favor of the company running the landfill.
I started this work dealing with environment and race before it was a movement or the whole concept of environmental justice.
Dr. Bullard was inspired to learn more about other communities of color facing unjust pollution burdens, and his research uncovered a very disturbing truth. All of Houston's waste facilities were in Black or low-income communities.
And put them on a map and color code those census tracts, locations, with magic markers. And yellow was a less than 10% minority and went all the way up to red being 50% or more. And it just so happened the vast majority of the pins, map pins, designating landfills were in the red, in majority Black neighborhoods. 5 out of 5 of the city-owned landfills, 6 out of 8 of the city-owned incinerators, and 3 out of 4 of the privately owned landfills in Houston were located in predominantly Black neighborhoods.
It seemed like this was no coincidence, but a pattern, something we can call environmental racism. Now, this might sound harsh at first, but hold your horses. I'll tell you why I said that. After what Bullard found in Houston, he wanted to know if it was just there or in other places as well. And so the study expanded to Dallas. He looked at lead smelters and found that they just happened to be in black and brown neighborhoods. He continued to Louisiana and found a disproportionate share of the chemical plants and refineries, of course, all in black communities. And like that wasn't enough, he found out that the largest hazardous waste landfill in the country was in Emel, Alabama, which is a 95% black community. Bullard's work gave the movement data and language. This research across the United States exposed the social injustice that black communities were facing town by town and city by city. Across the Atlantic, before the term of environmental justice became popular, Nigerians were already living the reality. The seeds of Nigeria's environmental struggle were planted in everyday survival, but it was in the Niger Delta that this struggle found its most defining voice. In the lush oil creeks of the Niger Delta, with the full blessing of the then Nigerian government, oil companies began to explore and extract from their land. And of all the casualties that came with the agreement between the Nigerian military state and the big oil companies, the Ogoni people were hit the worst, enduring decades of spills, flares, and poisoned farmlands. Amongst the list was a catastrophic oil well explosion in 1970 that bred many horrific experiences for the Ogoni people. In fact, by the end of 1990, the total amount of crude oil spilled in Ogoni land was reportedly over 2.5 million barrels. Out of this suffering, a movement was born, the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, popularly known as MOSOP. With Ken Saro-Wiwa chosen as the pressure group spokesperson, they presented a Bill of Rights to the government alongside a demand for the protection and devastation of their land. But with the group's little bargaining power, the government carried on with business as usual. Realizing they needed more drastic measures, in January 1993, 1/3 of the entire population was mobilized to come out in peaceful protest against the Nigerian government's betrayal of their land.
We are going to demand our rights peacefully, non-violently, and we shall win.
But still with no immediate effect on Shell's operations, things quickly got out of hand and divisions came within the group. Ken decided to take a more violent approach, stirring the youth up to destroy their infrastructure and intimidate their staff, which eventually halted the operations of Shell. It was in that moment that the military government saw Ken as the single biggest internal threat to a significant chunk of their income stream. Saro-Wiwa dared to speak the truth, that oil wealth was built on his people's suffering, and his voice shook an unsettled government. And under General Sani Abacha's rule, dissent became treason. Unfortunately, on the 21st of May 1994, 4 chiefs alleged to be opposing members of Ken Saro-Wiwa's youth pressure groups were brutally burnt and cut into pieces. Ken Saro-Wiwa was arrested on suspicion of having orchestrated the killing of all the chiefs based on standing disagreements he had with them. Despite completely denying all charges, he was in prison for over a year before he was eventually brought to trial in front of a special tribunal, which was referred to as a kangaroo court, with the judges suspected to have been handpicked by a government that had been seeking to silence him. Despite the global outcry of the unfair arrest, Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 others were sentenced to death by hanging, which many would say was in a bid to silence the struggle. But while his life may have been brutally cut short, his last words remain immortal. "Lord, take my soul, but the struggle continues." Indeed, the struggle continues, as his death turned the Niger Delta into a symbol of environmental resistance around the world, mirroring Nigeria's unfinished fight for ecological justice. Now, you may be wondering why I took you through this journey. It's because when we talk about environmental justice and activism, we think of it as a distant concept and, funnily enough, even something that's left for the whites. But from the Warren County story to the creeks of Ogoni land, we see that environmental justice is deeply rooted in our identity and our shared experiences as Africans and people of color. So yes, environmental justice is your business. And as the climate crisis deepens, so should the fight for environmental justice continue.
These structural factors behind racism still persist. Some people just don't want to believe the data. They don't want to believe their own eyes. Dumping and Dixon was the first book on environmental justice. And I got letters, nasty letters, from publishers saying, well, the environment is neutral, it's objective. There's no such thing as environmental justice. Everybody is treated the same. Even today, there's a lot of that going on. The issue of justice still remains. America is segregated and so is pollution. And so if we are to solve many of our environmental problems, we have to solve the problems of inequality and use a justice and equity lens. We're at an emergency, and climate change is knocking on the front door, and somehow we're just sitting on the couch twiddling our thumbs or watching TV. You know, these heat waves with flooding, with these hurricanes, you know, the world is burning, the world is on fire, and I think we have to speed up the solutions. 40 years is too long. We don't have 40 years.
I'm Oluwatoni Ogubanjo for Green Grow TV, and if you've enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave your comments and your thoughts in the comment section. This episode, of course, is the first of many, so feel free to let us know what else and what more you want to know and have us talk about. Thank you so much for watching. Till next time, it's bye for now.